who had a few dollars, parents who could afford it, they moved out, both black and white. They moved out of the city, or they put their kids into parochial schools. And what you had left, I think there were like 100,000 kids when I was attending Southie High. And then it quickly dropped down to like 54,000, short period of time. So it changed the whole school system, and everybody lost. Black and white parents lost. Their kids were denied a decent education. Never lived up to its expectation. The plan was poorly devised, poorly conceived. The judge appointed 3 masters to help oversee this whole thing. It just so happened that one of the masters was my advisor at Harvard. I graduated from Harvard School of Education. And he was a very, very capable, competent professor. My advisor, academic advisor, black fella, Dr. Charles Woolley. And well, in all due respect to Charles Woolley, he didn't know the first thing about Boston. He's not from here. He's a great professor, great teacher, but because of his credentials, he was appointed master. And that's what you had. You had people coming up with plans that they didn't really understand. In the neighborhoods, the complexity of Boston, the diversity of Boston. I mean, I wish this happened during my watch, because I would have done what I did during integration of public housing. You know, they told me that you couldn't integrate public housing in Boston because it would be chaos. It would be worse than busing. And the papers even agreed with that. There were 50 cops standing outside of each public housing development, waiting for trouble to start. Well, there wasn't one single incident when we integrated public housing, not one. And the reason why there wasn't is because for months in advance, we had cookouts, and we had organized basketball leagues, and we had organized teas, or whatever it was. And we got people who were moving in, scheduled to move in to meet the people that were already living there. We got the kids who were moving in to meet the kids that were already living there. We formed basketball leagues, we formed Girl Scouts, and all these different programs. They knew each other. We did a lot of planning before the event actually took place. Now, busing is one thing, you're bringing kids in from one neighborhood, but imagine, and you have incidents, but imagine living there. You know, you can imagine you'd expect the worst, and everybody expected the worst. Not one single incident. So it really was a disservice to the city, that whole busing period. And it could have been done better, professionally, and it would not have had the negative consequences that it had in Boston. And let me give you one last story. If you would ask what book did I like, what account do I like that describes this, most of them are horrible. Most of the media accounts were horrible. Boston Globe did a horrible job covering the whole story. But there was a fella that I met who wrote a negative story one of the early days of busing in Boston. His name was J. Anthony Lucas. And J. Anthony Lucas wrote a book was called Common Ground. And Common Ground was, he won the Pulitzer Prize for it. He was a New York Times reporter. Sure we get it down here in the library. But anyway, Lucas was negative, this one story, the early days of busing, and then he called me, or he saw me outside of Southie High. And he said to me, you know, he was very critical, and we had words. And I was critical of his story. And so he said to me, so what would you do? I said, you don't even know these people. You don't know the white people, you don't know the black people, you don't know the black kids, you don't know the white kids, you don't know the first thing about any of this. You're from New York, you're in famous New York Times reporter. You're like a lot of reporters, you just come in blowing in town. You think you can write a story about people you don't know. Well, you can't. You gotta get to know the people. So he shouted me down. He didn't like that kind of advice. Bit arrogant. Called me back 2 days later and he says, could I take you up on that? Could we talk about it a little bit more? And I says, yeah, of course. He didn't like me and I didn't like him. So we sat down, we had a sandwich and a beer. And I said, all right, here's what you can do. Get a black family, get a white family from Charlestown, and get a kind of a professional person who has kids. Everybody has kids that are affected by this busing decision. I said, I'll give you a person from Charlestown. Her name is Alice McGough. She's got a bunch of kids, no husband, and she's struggling. She works hard to try to make ends meet, send her kids to school, Charlestown High School. Well, her kids don't go to Charlestown High School. They're assigned way across the other side of the city. And she doesn't know what to do. She's been boycotting the school. Listen to her. Hear her story. Find out what she's thinking. And you can write about it. I said, there's this lady in Roxbury. Her name is Twyman. She's boycotting the schools, her kids, because she doesn't want her kids going all the way over the other side of the city. I said, talk to her, see what she has to say, get to know her. Then you get to know a black person affected, a white person affected, and then I said, to keep this thing balanced, get yourself a professional person. Got a guy named Diva. He's a college professor. He might even be here. I don't know. One of the colleges here. He's maybe a law professor. Yeah, might have been here. And they lived up in Beacon Hill. They had two kids. Their kids didn't go to school in Beacon Hill. Their kids, one kid was bused over here, and the other kid was bused over here. So now we have three very diverse families. That if this great writer called Tony Lucas, Anthony Lucas, can capture that, and he's got himself a book. Well, he wrote the book, and he did a great job. And he captured 3 points of view, very different from one another, but all had a common ground. That's why he called it Common Ground, and that was that schools were awful. They wanted their kids to attend a better school, but this wasn't the plan to make the schools better for these kids. And he wrote the book and became a Pulitzer Prize and a movie as well. So it's a lesson for all of you, all of us, that the program is only as good as the preparation. If you're not, it's like going into a class and you're not prepared, you're going to fail. But if you're prepared, you're going to do well. In busing, we're poorly prepared. In housing, public housing, integration of public housing, which seemed like far more difficult, far more challenging, it went without incident. That's a big difference.
You have your next meeting at 12, right?
12 o'clock, yeah.
Uh-oh. Alright. I guess we're starting to run out of time.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to like jump to the end?
A lot of my questions were covered, so.
I just have a question about busing. My parents both grew up in Hyde Park. My dad went to Hyde Park High. My mom left to go to Westwood High.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was a South Boston policeman. So I had like a lot of stories from this, and there obviously wasn't much learning going on at the time
No.
in the schools. How do you think you would have changed it? Because you had success with the public housing.
Yeah,
so.
the housing was, recently a lot of people, more people are starting to ask me, how is it that public housing worked and public education didn't? Good question. you should write a book about it, because it really, it has not been told.